This is NEAF Talks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the hardest working MC in the cosmos, Vincent Coulihan.
Good morning, all. Good morning and welcome to NEAF. We really have an extraordinary program set up for you this whole weekend and some really amazing presenters. And it starts really with our very first presenter, a technical fellow living in Temecula, California, working for the Boeing Corporation. During his 42-year career, specializing in guidance, navigations, control, and mission design and planning. He designed the architect with his team behind the CST-100 Starliner, autonomous flight guiding for the vehicles for the rendezvous, departure, and deorbit of the Starliner. He was the chief engineer for the Boeing team that developed the autonomous rendezvous technologies for advanced projects. Please welcome Tom Mulder.
All right, good afternoon. Let's get this NEAF party started. Before I start talking about Starliner itself, I want to put a plug in for my own Temecula Valley Association of Astronomers. Temecula is about an hour north of downtown San Diego, and if any of you are in the area, we meet the first Monday of every month. We'd love to have you come join us. All right, I'm going to break this into three different parts. The first one is I'm going to assume that not everybody in the room understands exactly what this commercial crew program is all about. And then I'm going to zero in on what we're doing on the Boeing side, and then I'm going to talk about the 4 different flight tests that we've had. Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning. Space Station itself, which really started in 1984. I was actually late to the party. I moved from Space Shuttle over to the Space Station program much later in 1985. And so I've been associated with the station program for a long time, as well as Shuttle and several other programs over time. So originally the plan was that the Space Shuttle itself would do the resupply, send up crews and so on up to the space station. Later the Russians joined the party, and they've got their own Soyuz and Progress vehicles for crew and cargo. And then under the George W. Bush administration, the decision was made to phase out the Space Shuttle itself and replace it with a new exploration program called Constellation. And the way of getting crew and cargo to the station, in addition to the Russians, was to do it on the Orion vehicle. Orion would be launched on an Ares rocket, and this was all managed by NASA at the time. Under President Obama, the decision was made to not only have commercial companies send up the cargo, but commercial companies also send crew to the space station. This is something new in the world, really, to have a commercial company do the job. And so this whole thing really started back in 2009 timeframe. That's when various companies got word that this was about to happen, including Boeing. And so we actually set up a small team. There were about a dozen of us that started with our initial design for the Boeing Starliner program. That led by NASA to about 2012, when NASA let out contracts to 3 different companies to pursue this, and then they were going to down select from there. And that down select took place in 2014 when NASA selected both SpaceX and Boeing, SpaceX with their Crew Dragon, Boeing with the Starliner. And so both companies have been working this all along, and so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Boeing side of the house, how our vehicle flies, and some of the history behind it. All right, so here's the big picture of what goes on our program. And I'm going to start at the very bottom box that you see right down here. And this is really a representation of assembly of our spacecraft that takes place in Florida. We do this in what used to be one of the orbiter processing facilities where the orbiters used to be processed. Of course, they're not anymore, so NASA KSC made this space available to other companies, and we took advantage of that. So it's actually in Florida in one of those OPFs where we assemble both the crew module and the service module. And so all these parts come together, and we build a service module for every flight. We build a total of 3 crew modules that fly over and over again. So we have an entire team in Florida that works this closely with a team here when I say here in Houston. I haven't been in Houston for 8 years since my wife and I moved to Temecula. But basically, most of the team resides in Florida and in Houston, but we also have folks elsewhere in the country for various subsystems and such. The rocket that we launch on, which I'm going to talk a little bit more detail on the next slide, is an Atlas V. And the Atlas V you can see in that lower left-hand corner there. And so they actually had a launch pad, but we had to erect a new launch tower for sending crew on it. ULA has never launched until now a crew on one of their rockets. They've been around for a long time, but this is something new. So Boeing said, you know what, we don't make our own rockets. We'll go ahead and fly on existing flight-proven Atlas V rockets that had already been flying, and then put our capsule on top and have a gantry that gets the crew up to the capsule itself. And so that takes place during ascent. Ascent takes about 12 minutes, maybe a little bit under 12. And basically, our vehicle is along for the ride. We are another piece of cargo, if you will, from a ULA standpoint, a very precious piece of cargo, obviously. But we're basically along for the ride during that time. I'll get to it on the next slide, but there's a number of improvements that were made to make sure that this is all done in a safe manner. After that, we perform rendezvous, and then we arrive at the space station. And arrival takes place either on flight day 1, the same day we launch, or on flight day 2, in which case the crew goes to sleep for roughly an 8-hour period, or flight day 3, depending on where the space station is in its orbit when we lift off. Dock to the space station, once we're operational, is intended for 6 months. This has been a standard 6 months for NASA for many, many years. Requirements-wise, we have to be able to stay put there for up to 7 months, so NASA gives a little bit of extra room at the end. But 6-month stay is the typical one. And in fact, you probably are aware that the Dragon spacecraft has been doing numerous missions with the 6-month stays. We're yet to get there, but I'll talk about that in a few minutes. After we undock from the space station, we separate from the space station, we do a deorbit burn, and we do a land landing. This whole thing takes between 4 and 6 hours if we go to the standard nominal landing site. Nominally, we don't want the crew to sit in the capsule any longer than they have to. You know, it's not a big, roomy place to be, so we want to get the crew to the space station as quickly as we can and get the crew down as quickly as we can. And for that reason, we get them down on the same flight day that we undock on. Entry takes place, and then we do entry, descent, and landing at one of 5 landing sites. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. During the mission itself, if you look at this middle section right here called Mission Operations, we, Boeing, decided to basically outsource the real-time operations itself over to NASA. NASA had all these skills. They had multiple control rooms at Mission Control in Houston, software, hardware, everything set up for the next phase for them, which was Artemis, and decided that they were hoping that they could reuse a lot of that for commercial companies. So we, Boeing, took them up on that and said, we'd like you to do that. You've got the skills, you've got the people to do that. We'll focus on the spacecraft hardware and software itself, and we'll provide real-time support during the mission. And so basically they support the mission in the same control room that they support Artemis missions that are coming up. And then we have a room just down the hall from them where folks like myself, experts in the various subsystems, support the mission. All this going on in Houston. In parallel with that, we also have our Florida team in a control room out in Florida. Okay, let's move on from there. So a few things about the Atlas V launch vehicle. As I mentioned before, Atlas V has flown a number of different times. It's proven to be a very reliable spacecraft. And if you look on the screen here, wherever you see blue, those are modifications that were made to accommodate putting our capsule on top. And so at the very top, actually let's start on the left-hand side. You can see that the crew access tower I mentioned was built on the spot at Space Complex number 41, which, by the way, the launch site is sandwiched between the two Falcon launch sites, Falcon 9 at Complex 40 to the south and 39 A and B to the north. A and B is where Falcon 9 launches on A, and then B is where Artemis actually launches from. So there's actually 4 launch pads that are boom, 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 boom at the northern end of the Cape itself. There's an emergency egress system such that if something goes wrong, the crew can immediately get outside and evacuate the pad. And then, of course, there's a crew access arm that's used in order to get the crew to and from the capsule. Hopefully it's only 2, but if we have to scrub the launch, they can come back out and come back in the next day for the launch itself. Okay, over on the right-hand side, you'll see, in addition to the capsule itself, there's a 70-inch skirt which attaches us to the Centaur itself. Centaur is the upper stage that Atlas uses. Originally the Centaur, which has been around for a long time, originally it had 2 engines on it. Over time they were able to save costs and cut that down to a single engine. When we came along, because we're a heavier payload than is typical, they actually put a second engine on there. So there's actually 2 engines on there to give us the performance that we need in order to get us off the ground. So that's shown by the RL-10A 4-2 engines, 2 of those I mentioned. Below that you've got the Atlas booster, and then Atlas can fly with anywhere from 0 to 5 solid rocket boosters. We actually fly with 2 solid rocket boosters to get us off the ground. All right, let's talk about Rendezvous for a minute. This is a ground track. These are actually sine waves. In reality, it's a circular orbit, but when you put it on a flat Earth, it looks like a sine wave as we go round and round and round. And you can see there, Space Launch Complex 41 is where we launch from. Main engine cutoff, which is actually the term that ULA uses for when the Centaur cuts off, not the booster engine, but the second stage. You can see that cuts off about 12 minutes after launch as we're arriving over the North Atlantic. So that's right up here. And then we've got launch vehicle separation, which is 3 minutes after that, and then we're off and running doing rendezvous. There's a common misconception that rendezvous begins when a spacecraft can see another spacecraft, when it's real close to it. Having worked rendezvous for 40 years now, I can tell you rendezvous really starts much, much earlier because we really start flying the vehicle relative to whatever the target vehicle is, in this case the space station, from the very beginning. And so we go into a set of phasing maneuvers that lets us catch up to the target vehicle. But again, all that starts really right after liftoff. In fact, specifically, it's about 15 minutes after launch. Now, our spacecraft is what NASA calls both autonomous and automated. When I work on other satellite programs, they typically just call it autonomous, meaning everything takes place on board the satellite. In NASA JSC terminology, they differentiate between autonomous and automated. Autonomous means that everything takes place on board the spacecraft, but it could be either by man or machine. Whereas automated means that everything takes place within a computer without any human input. So when I say automated and autonomous, that means everything is really taking place on board the spacecraft. The crew is along for the ride. When I say along for the ride, they're still busy monitoring systems and keeping track of things. But really, all of the burns that take place, all of the attitude maneuvers, et cetera, really take care of themselves during this process. And I have to say something here. I've got a friend and colleague of mine called Mike Frietta. And Mike, if it's okay with you, I'm going to tell just a little bit of story about you. But Mike Frietta is the brains behind many of the guidance algorithms that are all plugging and chucking on board that are figuring out exactly what burns are coming up. And so the very first burn is a very important one. It's called orbit insertion. When we launch and we have main engine cutoff, and at 12 minutes and then 15 minutes we separate, during that time we're actually suborbital at that time, so it's very important that we get that first burn off to lift our perigee or low point around the Earth, get it up high, and get into an actual orbit itself. It just takes one burn to do that, but that's a very critical burn that we put a whole lot of attention on. And Mike was actually the guy that created the algorithm that does that. And just to kind of make fun of Mike real quick, he told me before our first orbital flight, the orbital flight test itself, he wasn't in mission control like I was. He was standing by, and he called me up and he said, "You know, Tom, I'm in my car. I've got the car running," and this was before launch. And if for some reason that burn doesn't happen, I'm going to head for the border and get out of here. But luckily, that never happened. In fact, all the guidance code on all three of the orbital missions performed flawlessly. We did have other issues, which many of you are aware of, but fortunately the guidance code itself worked exactly as planned. So thank you, Mike, for making all that part of it work very well. After orbital insertion, there's a series of burns that take place. If it's flight day 2 or flight day 3 docking, the crew goes to sleep once or twice, and then arrival is later. So why is it that sometimes we can get there on flight day 1, other times it's not until flight day 3? It's really all due to orbital mechanics, and it doesn't matter what spacecraft you're talking about. If you launch when the space station itself is way out in front and you have a lot of catching up to do to get to its orbit, it just takes a long time to do that. So anyway, but by having flight day 1, 2, and 3 docking opportunities, that means we have everyday launch opportunities as well. So I'm going to get into the flight tests in a few minutes, but in all three of the flight tests that we performed, we scheduled all three of those for arrival on flight day 2, roughly 24 hours after liftoff. And so we get on orbit, we do phasing. It's relatively benign during that phasing time, and then on day of rendezvous itself, we go fly up to a point below the space station. We do proximity operations, and then we do docking after that. After staying on the station, the vehicle undocks, and as I mentioned before, it takes anywhere from 4 to 6 hours in order to get down to the Earth, and then we do a landing on the Earth. Okay, enough about that. All right, so this is a simulation that we ran in Houston. Actually, I've run this many, many times, but this is actual sped up. This is not real time. This is much faster. This is our corridor approach to the space station. And you can see the different jet firings that take place to hold our attitude and then also hold our position. We actually stop about 10 meters away, wait till we get a go from the ground, and then we press ahead and do what's called final approach and docking. Again, this is fully automated, and it uses sensors that we have on board that are actually tracking the space station itself. After we undock, the software goes and finds the best landing site to land at. We have 5 different candidate landing sites, as you can see here. Up at the top in red is the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. It's a very large area. To the lower right, there are 2 locations at White Sands Missile Range, one that we just call White Sands Missile Range, or WSMR, and the other one called the White Sands Space Harbor. Space Harbor was actually also an alternate landing site for the Space Shuttle program. In fact, there actually was one of the 135 Space Shuttle flights actually landed at White Sands Space Harbor. STS-3 was the one. But it's a big, wide open space area. We don't want to land in the middle of a city. We want to land where there's plenty of room if needed. And then in blue there, you'll see what's called the Wilcox Playa. It's a dry lake bed in southeastern Arizona, also a very remote area. And then Edwards Air Force Base in yellow. Edwards has approved landing there as a contingency landing site. So if we have to, we can go there but we don't nominally target going to Edwards. So, all right, during entry, descent, and landing, right after the deorbit burn, let me back up to there, right after the deorbit burn, we actually jettison the service module. We wait till after the deorbit burn because that service module, some parts of that are likely to survive re-entry. Most of it will burn up, a part of it can survive re-entry. So we make sure it is also part of that deorbit burn and is in fact coming down with the crew module. It actually is targeted to come down uprange of the crew module and splash down in the Pacific Ocean. In fact, in all 3 flight tests that we went orbital on, everything went very successful with that. So we drop that off, we build a new one for the next flight, and then we land the crew module. So the crew module comes in, as I mentioned, entry, descent, and landing, and we deploy drogues, we deploy main parachutes, we jettison the base heat shield, and then that reveals a set of 6 airbags within that are automatically inflated. And so instead of using jets to brake ourselves when we land, like Soyuz does and like the Chinese Shenzhou does, this is a more benign system. We don't require that last second activity. We deploy these airbags plenty high, and that becomes the cushion for landing, and that allows us to land on land. And here you can see we have 3 parachutes that set it down, and then we land on those airbags itself, and then we have a ground team that zips up to it and helps the crew out. We also provide the option for splashing down in the ocean, and the reason why is because if you're on orbit and something serious happens, such as a meteoroid hit that breaches the cabin and the crew needs to come home, they can't necessarily wait until the next one of those 5 landing sites is in front of them. And so we've basically mapped out the world into various zones, and we let the vehicle splash down. So the vehicle is fully stocked to splash down in the water, and we have processes in place and people ready to go if they have to go rescue them. All right, let's talk flight tests. We've had a total of 4 flight tests. One was just a ground pad abort test, and then the other 3 were orbital flight tests. This is a pad abort test itself. I'll let you listen to.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Liftoff.
Roll complete. LA cut off. On track. Comet cut off. Picture on. 40 kill parachute. Broke parachutes main. SM set.
It's a very proud moment for me. Should be a very proud moment for the entire Boeing team who's made this happen. And hopefully our NASA customers are equally happy with the progress that we've made. And it's a great day for the United States of America.
2 mains fully disreefed. Base heat shield jettison. Airbags inflating. CM touchdown.
Okay, so that was back in November of 2019, and unlike the Space Shuttle itself, our vehicle, and I believe this is true of the Dragon as well, we have the ability to do an abort right off the pad itself. So if something goes wrong before we even lift off, the vehicle has the thrust capacity and targeting in order to go out over the Atlantic Ocean and splash down there. So that's a big safety issue when I worked on shuttle that fortunately has been solved today. This test here was complete success, and this was really just a month before we did our first orbital flight test. Let's go to the next slide. So this was the first time Atlas actually launched our capsule. You can see in the pictures there, Atlas V getting ready in the vertical vehicle facility, or the VIF. And you can see our capsule being placed on top of it. You can see launch there, and you can see the parachutes themselves. The launch itself was very successful. So again, the first time they had launched our spacecraft. After we executed main engine cutoff and then separated from the vehicle, Mike's guidance software went off to compute the first burn. And this turned out to be a pretty big software glitch that we had to deal with in mission control. And what happened was, instead of converging on a solution for that burn, it didn't come up with a solution. Turns out it wasn't Mike's fault. I called Mike and said, turn off the car, you don't need to worry about it. But it was another software problem, really just one line of code of not getting the time updated properly on our spacecraft, the time of launch itself. And so we have protections in place throughout our guidance, nav, and control, but especially in the guidance code, protections in place that do sanity checks on the numbers it's crunching. And if those numbers don't look right, instead of coming up with an erroneous answer, it says, I'm not going to give you an answer. Better do nothing than do the wrong thing. So that's really what happened here. The code itself said, I'm not going to give you an answer right now. We discovered real quickly in mission control what had happened. Now we have backups to backups to backups on this program. The backup to this is that we do a canned maneuver instead of a real-time computed burn itself based on the actual orbital, suborbital condition. We send up a canned maneuver itself. Unfortunately, this our day, we got the maneuver, we got the Delta V shipped up to the vehicle, and when we sent the command up to execute that, we lost contact with the vehicle. Turned out our spacecraft was in not a very good attitude, and so in terms of antenna line of sight to the TDRS satellite system. And so it took a period of time. Now normally we want to do this burn at the high point or the apogee. At this point in time we had actually crossed apogee, and so eventually we did get that burn up to it, and it did the burn, and it went orbital, and we were good to go. Now if we had crew on board, the crew can do that burn themselves. They don't wait on the ground, but in this case there's no crew, so we required communications with the ground. So anyway, because of that, it was not the most efficient burn. We used more propellant than we expected, and as a result, it was questionable whether we had enough propellant to go dock with the space station and then come home. Well, from a priority standpoint, it was more important to get our vehicle home than to demonstrate rendezvous and docking. In fact, early on the program, we did not even intend on doing rendezvous. The first flight, we were going to get the vehicle on orbit, do a shakedown on it, test all the systems, and bring it home. So we were extremely disappointed that we didn't do the rendezvous and docking. But the good news is we were able to do that deorbit burn and get the vehicle home, and it landed at White Sands Space Harbor. So that was the very first orbital flight test. Okay, this is the next flight test.
Atlas systems, propulsion, go. Hydraulic, go. Pneumatic, go. Go Atlas, go Centaur, go Starliner.
5, 4, 3, 2, and liftoff. Starliner is headed back to space on the shoulders of Atlas, powered by a workforce dedicated to its success.
Again, this one was uncrewed as well.
We had the privilege and the honor of watching Starliner arrive. It was really spectacular to see this beautiful vehicle arrive. This is a momentous day in NASA's history, and just paving the way for the future as we start enabling commercial flights here in low Earth orbit while NASA pivots to the moon and eventually onto Mars.
The journey has been hard, but the reward is what we see today as our teams work together to meet the promise of advancement offered in low Earth orbit. This connection is the first of many that will continue for years to come. No one goes to space alone, and we can all benefit from the efforts involved.
Undocking complete.
A little sad to see her go, but looks like a successful mission so far. Godspeed, Starliner.
And touchdown, Starliner. We're touching down in the desert of New Mexico, marking the completion of Orbital Flight Test 2. And that touchdown coming at 5:49 p.m. Central Time, almost exactly 6 days into the mission.
Oh my. I mean, we all tracked towards
Butch,
from the beginning, from launch all the way through the mission, and this is what we were hoping for at the end, right? I mean, a soft, safe landing, culmination of all the hard work. I mean, you've got to give a huge congratulations to the folks at Boeing. Well, you couldn't ask for more.
Okay, so that was back in 2022. Obviously, the software worked to get us into orbit. We put a lot of attention into that, make sure we didn't repeat that same problem. But because OFT itself didn't get us to space station, we, Boeing, actually paid for our next test flight before we actually put crew on board. We delivered 500 pounds of cargo to the space station and 500 pounds back, and so that was a very successful mission. All right, let's talk about crew flight test. Before I do this, let me ask a question. How many of you have heard of Starliner before coming in here tonight? Okay, almost everybody. How many of you had heard of Starliner a year ago before Butch and Sunny did their trip up to the space station? Okay, not as many. Okay, that's what I expected. All right, so this is the first time we flew crew on the vehicle, and let me go to the next slide for this one. Oh, before I do that, this is OFT2. We have a sensor system that actually tracks the space station, does optical recognition on the space station itself, and that's how we feed the navigation parameters over to guidance in order to fly in. This is actual footage from OFT2. It's actually sped up, and it's not, the resolution was reduced as well in order to fit on the thumb drive, otherwise it would have been pretty big. But this is what it looked like on board the spacecraft as we were approaching. Okay, crew flight test. I'll let you watch the video first, and then I'm going to talk about it. It's June 5th, 2024. There's Butch and Sunny ready to get on board. And as most of you are aware, the mission was expected to last a week, and it lasted 3 months. We'll talk about that. This is actually the first time ULA had ever launched a crew on one of their rockets, so they were really excited. Everything went nominal during ascent. The Flight Day 1 rendezvous was all nominal. Nominal meaning normal. There's the docking. I'll talk about that in just a minute. There's the crew as they arrived on June the 6th last year. You can see on there, we have quite a few switches in the cockpit. Let me say a few words about that real quick. So while we have software that flies the vehicle, we don't rely entirely on that software and those computers. If for some reason those computers go belly up or there's a common fault among that software, we do have a limited number of switches in the cockpit that the crew can take control with. They can actually fly the vehicle if those computers were to fail and can actually re-enter back to Earth. Okay, so as I mentioned, they launched on June the 5th, and everything went fine on the first day of rendezvous. In fact, we even let Butch do some flying of his own. This was actually pre-planned, it wasn't on the spot. But we wanted to demonstrate the manual piloting capability, what kind of control authority that Butch had of the spacecraft. The astronaut office really likes to know if they have to take over control, what's it really feel like? This is a test flight, so we included that as part of flight day 1 before the crew actually went to sleep. It actually has excellent control authority. He told us that it was just like in the simulator, both for translating and rotating the spacecraft itself. Crew went to sleep. Next day they wake up. This is supposed to be the day that they go dock with the space station. And let me back up before I get to that, because there were actually 2 issues that we had with the thruster system. The first issue was with a leak of helium. Helium itself is not the propellant that the thrusters use. Helium itself is a pressurant that pushes the fuel and oxidizer into the combustor for combustion and so on. We had a very, very, very slight helium leak that was detected pre-launch. In fact, it was so small that we felt it was safe to fly. NASA said it was safe to fly, and so that did not stop us from launching. That helium leak, and there were some others, there was more than one, were all extremely small and took place actually that whole time until we got docked. Once we got docked, we closed the valves, there was no leak, and then we reopened, came home, and leak was really never a problem. The bigger problem was with the thrusters themselves. Everything worked fine on flight day 1. On flight day 2, not at the beginning of flight day 2, but when we got closer to the space station, we had some thrusters that started to die on us. Now the good news is we have 28 reaction control system thrusters. We have 20 larger thrusters that we can do rendezvous with. And then this is separate from the 12 thrusters that are on the crew module that are needed for entry, descent, and landing. But nonetheless, this is not a good situation when you start having these RCS thrusters fail. And so when we got up to the approach corridor, we were still a safe distance from station. We did a stop at that point in time, which was part of the plan to begin with, to give Butch and Sunny a chance to test fly the control system now that they're on the corridor and they're only hour and a half away from docking. They tested all that and things were looking up, and then we lost a couple more thrusters, and so we said, Butch, let's just let the vehicle coast right now. We're not in a big hurry. What the crew has on board in terms of data and displays is really just a subset of what we have on the ground. We're constantly streaming lots and lots of data. I've got like 5 displays in front of me, others do as well, where we have a great deal of information, and we had really characterized those 5 failed thrusters as being a thermal issue on the ground. And so on the ground, we sent commands up to the spacecraft itself to each of those 5 thrusters in order to recover them. Of those 5 thrusters, 4 were brought back. One of them was failed and was failed for the rest of the mission. And so of the 28 thrusters we had, which is normally what we call 2 fault tolerant, you can lose any 2 and you can still fly. Of those 28 thrusters, we had 27 good thrusters that we could fly with. And so we decided on our side, on the Boeing side, we had serious discussions with NASA, Space Station program. Everybody was in agreement, let's go ahead and press ahead to docking. And in fact, that's what we did. And so we pressed ahead, the 27 thrusters were just fine. We docked, everything was good. After we docked, there's a serious issue. This is not something we take lightly. But after we docked, we spent quite a bit of time analyzing more of the data. We did ground tests of thrusters. We had meetings on a daily basis between Boeing and NASA, as well as Aerojet Rocketdyne. The thrusters themselves, actually, Boeing doesn't make thrusters. We buy them from other companies. Aerojet Rocketdyne has been around for decades. They built the thrusters on the shuttle. They built the thrusters for our vehicle. And so they were really good about joining in and really uncovering what's going on here with these thrusters. And so we had drawn the conclusion that this was a thermal issue on those thrusters. But to make sure it would be a safe return for the crew, we went ahead and did additional firings of all 27 thrusters while we were docked to station. And all 27 thrusters worked well. They had cooled off in the meantime, and we were good to go. Nonetheless, in discussions with NASA, while Boeing, we concluded we could bring the crew home. NASA had another option available to it, and that was, rather than bring the crew home on our spacecraft, there was an upcoming Crew Dragon with a crew of 4 on board. Instead of sending all 4, they would just send 2 up, and then Butch and Sunny would be the other 2 to make up that complement of 4 for the next 6 months. And then those would be the astronauts for that crew rotation, and then all 4 of them would come home. And so NASA said, since we have this really good option, and Butch and Sunny are real live astronauts, they're not tourists. They, in fact, they had both done tours of duty on station before, so they knew what to do. So NASA decided to keep them up there until February of this year. February turned into March until Dragon was ready to be launched and bring the crew home. And then the crew came home back on March 18th, last month. So we're all happy for Butch and Sunny, obviously. By the way, having worked with Butch and Sunny, NASA could not have picked 2 better astronauts to take care of that situation that went on board. So anyway, big congrats to them. Let me show some pictures here of the rendezvous with the ISS, including pictures taken from the space station itself. These are photographs of our vehicle that was docked to the space station. The picture with the stars and stripes in it was taken over the 4th of July weekend last year, when we still didn't know if Butch and Sunny would be coming home on our spacecraft or not, and while we were doing all this testing on the ground and on orbit. But in the end, as I think everybody knows by now, they did stay up there until last month. And in fact, they even did a spacewalk together, and were very handy in doing real-life science experiments and maintenance on the space station itself. There you can see, after undocking, those thrusters that were firing as expected. What you see in blue there is what's called a relative motion plot. And this is the common way in the rendezvous world that we display trajectories. But basically, the target vehicle, in this case the space station, is at the center of the crosshairs. And so if you're sitting on the space station looking out, this is the view that our spacecraft would take, and actually did take, as it departed the space station. The reason I threw this in is because this is not the normal way that we separate from the space station. We normally go out through a corridor and then leave from there. Space station program wanted to make sure we got out of their hair quickly, and so we didn't follow the standard trajectory, we followed the one that you see here. But basically we came off the front end of the space station, and then we crossed above the space station at about, 1,700 meters or so, and then a couple hours later we did the deorbit burn and landed.
Separation confirmed. Starliner is now backing away from station and starting its return to Earth.
You guys, it is time to bring Calypso home. You have got this. We have your backs. Bring her back to Earth. Good luck.
Many years of great enjoyment, swimming together, playing together, and being involved with each other's lives, and it's been special. Bring it home.
Confirmation, all 27 jets have fired. And you just saw burn 4, which just completed. We're hearing the burn.
Starliner has exited to keep out spare.
And we just heard confirmation that Starliner is out of the approach ellipsoid.
Starliner safely departed the International Space Station and is on its way back to Earth.
Thrusters on Starliner's service module are now firing. All thrusters firing well so far. And we did see the deorbit burn cut off successfully. Teams here on the ground reporting a good burn. Starliner is now on its way to White Sands Space Harbor, New Mexico, and a planned touchdown at about 11 p.m. Central, midnight Eastern Time.
And the service module has just jettisoned, separated, and is now falling away. Flight controllers here in the room are reporting that we are out of that blackout period and everything is looking good. Forward heat shield and drogues out. And there's the main parachutes there on your screen. You see 3 out, currently reefing.
Next up is that heat shield jettison. And there it goes. That again makes way for the airbag inflation.
Nice to see that. You can see the airbags deploying there on your screen. Just a beautiful sight as Starliner makes its way to the sands of New Mexico. Really just a flawless and beautiful descent of Starliner today. Starliner has returned safely. Well done to the entire team for completing the mission with a successful undocking, deorbit, and landing. Starliner has once again proven herself a safe ride to and from space. On behalf of the entire Boeing team, welcome home, Calypso.
Okay, so what's next? We have invested considerable resources, lots and lots of time, brought in experts. Definitely Aerojet Rocketdyne has been involved in this, and NASA very closely in examining all the data, and we're in the process of making improvements to the thruster system, both hardware and software, in order to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. There's a whole big set of testing that's going on at White Sands right now, a whole rig that's been set up to test this under various conditions with all these changes that are being made. And in fact, we're not ready to fly until we've proven to ourselves, and certainly to NASA as well, that this vehicle will be safe to fly and that we won't have these thrusters fail again. So that's a big deal that's going on right now. We don't know when the next launch date will be, possibly early next year, but neither NASA nor us are going to put a date on the calendar until all systems are ready to go. That concludes my pitch. Thank you for listening to this. All right, we've got time for questions. Anyone in the audience? Yes, over here.
Did you find out what was wrong with the thrusters?
When it comes to subsystems, there's a thing called induced environment and there's a thing called natural environment. It doesn't matter if it's a thruster or any other part on the vehicle. The induced environment itself, induced by firing the thrusters over the course of flight day 1, and especially with Butch doing additional thruster firings when he did his manual test firing, all that resulted in accumulated heat that we didn't realize would happen to that extent. What we modeled for the induced environment was not as hot as what it ended up really being, what it's really like in space. And so it was really that heat that created a problem. Okay, another question. Anyone?
Is it the heat we're talking about, is the system cryogenic or is it just compressed gas?
The heat had to do with both the fuel and the oxidizer and what the heat did to that. So there's no cryogenic involved. These are biprop engines, and the fuel is monomethyl hydrazine, and the oxidizer is nitrotetroxide, and it just created an issue with those substances.
And the helium is just to get pressure behind those things?
Yes, the temperature issue was unrelated to the helium thing. The helium is there to pressurize and push the fuel and oxidizer into the system. So that was a completely unrelated issue. And of course we're addressing that for sure as well to make sure that those don't leak. Any other questions? Down here?
Was the fail to start, the wrong thrust or failure to shut off on command?
The software looks at the thrust level coming out of each of the thrusters. If that thrust level is not high enough, the software says that thruster is not available to me, I'm going to use another thruster. So it didn't create like an erroneous motion on the vehicle, but rather those thrusters were inhibited when they didn't put out the proper thrust level. Okay, any other questions? Right down here.
How long would it normally take for the thruster to recover to the extent that it would show up as being normal?
You mean how long would it take for those thrusters to cool down? I don't know exactly, but I do know that after we were docked for a period of days and we did our SM thruster test firing, they had cooled down by then, and they all worked just fine. So Aerojet Rocketdyne may in fact know, and we'll learn more from the tests that are going on the ground. Okay, in the back, yes.
I know you were originally contracted for 6 operational flights, and this is still a test flight. With the station going away in 2030, do you still think you'll be able to complete all of your contracted missions?
That's a good question. As far as we know, yes. It hasn't been determined by NASA exactly what flights will take place in the future. I could only speculate, that maybe if we had a couple flights next year and then 1 flight per year after that, the last flight would be in 2030. But no, we're still working the contract, assuming the same thing that we signed years ago back in 2014. Okay. Any other questions? Back there? Okay. Oh, to my right. Okay, yes.
Oh, me? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that's what I had.
Sure.
When you guys determine the problem with pressure and heat, you had enough data on the ground to figure that out? Or did you come to your conclusions after the spacecraft had landed?
We came to the conclusion while we were still docked to the space station. We poured over all the data. I mentioned we did the extra test flights, and that's why we felt confident that the thruster would behave fine coming down. What happens is during Rendezvous, you fire those thrusters a whole lot more than you do coming down. Over a 2-day period, you're holding attitude the whole time. You're doing a series of burns to get up, all those burns for the corridor approach. When we bring the vehicle home and we looked at how many thruster firings would be needed coming home, it was considerably less. In fact, fewer than what we did on flight day 1. And so when we modeled that, we said those thrusters should be fine. But as I mentioned, NASA had another alternative. It wasn't like this was their only option. And so they said, let's take option B and go with that. They'd still have a complement of 4 astronauts on board doing real work for the next 6 months. It was just 2 of them were different than the 2 that were planned to go up.
Thank you, whoever was over
Yeah,
there.
thank you. They're thanking you. Okay. Any other questions?
Will there be another uncrewed flight or just ground testing?
So we're waiting for NASA to decide, and they can't decide until we're done doing all our testing. The next flight may end up being uncrewed, or it might end up being crewed. So stand by and we'll find out in the future. Our spacecraft can fly either way. It's fully autonomous and automated. And if it's uncrewed, well, then it'll become a cargo flight. And the station does need cargo up and down mass as well. So it's really up to NASA what they decide to do. Anything else? Okay.
What's the final descent speed and what's the G-forces on hitting the ground?
I don't know. I don't have those numbers. I don't work that part of the program. But you're asking, even though you have airbags, how good is the jolt when you touch down?
Yeah.
I know it's within requirements. I know, obviously. And we've done a number of test drops over the years and measured those Gs. It's just not a part of the program that I work. Good question, though. Thank you. Anything else? Is there one over here?
Yeah, I'm just curious, with the end of the space station coming from the
We are always open to other customers, for sure. And in fact, NASA is pursuing commercial space stations. In fact, they're funding a number of different contractors. Boeing isn't one of them, as to pursuing commercial space stations after the ISS is over, and then NASA would just pay them for their services whenever they send astronauts up to them. So yes, those are all candidates for Starliner, absolutely. Okay, is that it? All right, thank you very much.